So, hi everyone. I'm Moira Smith. I am the Assistant Emergency Medicine Informatics Director at the University of Virginia. And as you know, decisions are being made both operationally and in the space of medical education in terms of being more data driven. There's been a great increase in the interest in informatics. And so we kind of wanted to go through how you can establish a clinical informatics elective at your institution using the resources that you have. I'm going to let our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we're going to quickly go through some of the considerations in developing this kind of curriculum for yourself and things that have worked for us, and then spend some time with questions that you may have in terms of getting set up at your own institution.
I'm Brian Kwan, and I'm faculty at UC San Diego Health and in the Department of Emergency Medicine and the Associate Program Director for the Clinical Fellowship.
I'm Rob Turner. I'm Program Director for the CI Fellowship at UT Southwestern in Dallas, and but I'll be sharing this work from when I was a resident in Michigan.
I'm Eugene. I'm Program Director for the Clinical Informatics Fellowship at NYU at Home Health. And we have an elective that is open to students and residents that it predates me, but we've become involved and want to share some of those experiences too.
That's the first question.
Oh, yeah.
How many of you are PDs or in program leadership? Fellows, like med ed, trainees, residents, or folks interested in informatics? Okay, that's super helpful framing.
So learning objectives, we mentioned program directors, fellowship directors, but anyone interested, really like any faculty that's kind of doing more data-driven work, IT work, informatics work at your institution, and then trainees that are interested in gaining more skills in this area and like also exploring these as career options. So learning objectives, recognizing the need of why it's important for emergency medicine residents to have early exposure to informatics, and identifying resources that you already have available to you in order to explore this part of your profession, and then creating an informatics curriculum for your residents, and then kind of trying to be thinking towards like what kind of skills you would like to actually see your residents walk away from. So why? We tend to think about the technical expertise of informatics and, how do we get data? How do we make modifications to our electronic health record? How do we improve our workflow? Sort of more the technical standards. But informatics is a very broad field, and it really opens you up to larger areas, both within research, within education, and then also within operational work. So implementation science, project management, leading a team, and then governance skill sets too, of, how do you make the right hires? How do you kind of manage the people that you're working with? And then a lot of times you're going to end up in situations where, people are reporting to you. It also teaches learners how to systematically solve complex problems within their own specific clinical environment, which I think when I talk to trainees about informatics, I say that's one of the things that I've appreciated most about the field is how do you start breaking down complex problems into areas that you can actually solve. And then the other thing that's really important for trainees to learn about is all the different types of potential career options that you have with informatics training. So let's say that you have a resident that comes to you and asks about setting up an informatics elective. They want to explore this within their residency program. So we're going to go through how you approach the timeline, personnel, resources that you have available, the kind of knowledge base and skill sets that you want your residents to walk away with after doing this elective, curriculum structure, and then kind of example curricula. So timeline considerations kind of change what you're going to have, the skill set expectations that you're going to have your learner come away with, kind of the things that you're going to offer and do with your trainee, whether it is a 2 or 4 week rotation, kind of smaller elective time blocks. If you're going to have recurring rotation, so maybe you have many trainees that are interested, or a longitudinal track, like tracks and threads are becoming more popular in residency programs to allow, greater depth of exploration. Personnel, a lot of times you're going to want to have at least the support. It may not be your program director that's leading the effort for the elective, but you at least want to have some engagement with your program leadership. A lot of times it's of great benefit if you do have an informaticist in your own department, your field, but then you can also get support from other informatics leaders in your institution. And a lot of times what makes informatics very different from other, fellowships that emergency medicine trainees can go into after residency is that a lot of times the fellowship program is housed within another specialty department, but you can also lean on those resources.
I think I certainly found in my experience, and actually, let me say at first that I feel like I'm standing on Nick and Rob's shoulders because they've been at this a lot longer than I have. So um, I think the first thing was like look to see what other people are doing because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Um, so that was, I'd say that's like certainly one of the things that I think Moira would allude to that's important. But resources that are really valuable is or certainly people in the, not just people who work in informatics, like a CXIO at your institution, but someone who's actually doing informatics work specific to emergency medicine. Those folks are really, really valuable. And I think that if you were to approach them and say, like, we're trying to build an elective, we would love you to be a part of this, I can't imagine that they would say no. Because I think one of the things we look for is to try to get resident learners involved in informatics. So, and then other resources that might be of use to you. If there's a fellowship program at your place, then that's also a good place to start. Again, those folks really like having learners be involved. It's a sort of like feed the pipeline of potential informatics fellows. So that would definitely be something valuable to look at. And then whatever training might exist in your institution that involves informatics, those are also people to get engaged. We actually have at our shop, there's a Department of Biomedical Informatics, which is it's housed within the Department of Medicine, but it tends to be more PhD heavy than clinician heavy. But those folks still really wanted to be engaged and a really valuable source of wisdom and resources. And then the last part I also would definitely recommend is most EHR vendors have some sort of end user level training that's typically available to all people, regardless. So they don't need to have any qualifications to take that training. That's really, really valuable because I certainly want to hear what other people's experience is, but my experience with informatics is like informatics interest like happens to people, like they stumble on something and I know many people that like came out of the undifferentiated stem cell medical student or whatever and were like, I'm going to do informatics. And usually it has something to do with something in the electronic health record that's frustrating to them or impedes their workflow. And people start to think like, why am I being asked to, click out of this BPA for this pop-up for the 30th time? And so giving people the skill set to the sort of brass tacks level skills that oftentimes these vendor available training resources provide, I think in my experience really helps and feel residents empowered. And they're going to learn a lot about like the underlying structure of the electronic health record and principles of informatics just by learning something about how these systems actually work. So that's a really, really valuable resource as well. Speaking of which, bless you. A lot of electronic health record vendors have varying levels of training that are available to end users. There's typically something that's like called a physician builder or a physician architect or something like that, which is usually like a more technically intensive set of training. But they also typically have, as I mentioned a minute ago, like sort of like one level training below that. That still teaches people really valuable brass tack skills that are going to be helpful when they're interacting with electronic health records. So And also you'll probably find that at your shop, the extent to which the non-clinical informatics people like having clinicians involved is going to vary really, really widely. From some places that are like, yeah, like we want everyone to be involved, we want the frontline clinicians to be involved as much as possible, and other places are like, you know, keep these dirty clinicians away from my pristine data structure or whatever. So there's going to be a real wide variation there. Um, Documentation is kind of sort of the bane of a lot of our existence in electronic health record, and finding ways to make that process more efficient. There's never going to be a shortage of that, so that's definitely something that is valuable to trainees. um, More recently, and again, we're trying to say EHR agnostic here, but more recently, some vendors have made um, modules available where people can extract data on their own from the electronic health record without having to go through like a specialized analyst. And those are, in my experience, I found like trainees actually really like that because it's a very, like discovery based thing where you can come up with a question and how many people in the emergency department were diagnosed with flu in the last month or something like that. And these self-service data query tools are like built to answer those sort of ground level questions, and that's a really valuable tool for engagement. And then data science, and I think the sort of like harder core aspects of data science, you're probably going to have to engage your Department of Biomedical Informatics or the equivalent to get involved in that. That being said, the other part of this, and I think Moira also alluded to this, is that there's a lot of misconceptions among trainees about like what we do, and they either tend to think that like you're the tech support person who should be crawling around on the ground figuring out like why this wire needs to be plugged in here, and like or I can't log in to the EHR today, and like that's either they expect that or they expect like someone to be sort of like a Steve Jobs wannabe or something like that. And it's really I mean, those are two very cliched like representations of what we actually do. And a lot of it is, as Maura said, it's nothing to do with actual technical skills. There's a guy named Homer Warner who's like one of the cardiologists who was doing informatics work back in the 60s and 70s, and he said that informatics is it's 20% technical and 80% sociological, or and I think like that's a pretty accurate thing. It's so one of the most common misconceptions is that you're not going to have any interaction with people, and that's nothing to be further from the truth. So learning about how the health system, a health system or a hospital chooses to put guardrails on like the electronic health record systems, like that's actually really valuable knowledge to have, and that's a lot of clinical informaticians do. Project management is another big one. There's a lot of what we do is project oriented, and then from the research side, learning about how does data get transferred from potentially one institution to another for big multi-site research projects, and there's someone sitting at this table has a lot more experience at that than I do. But so those are all really valuable things for learners to be exposed to as well. Okay. Oh, all right. And then as far as what's the actual meat of what you're going to put in the elective, I'm definitely a big fan of, as we were mentioning a minute ago, like having something that that teaches people skills that they can actually use like on their next shift is really, really valuable. And again, a lot of that is going to come from training opportunities that that the vendor provides. Having some exposure to the at a high level of how the decision-making process works in informatics, that's actually can be a really valuable thing. And I think that's the kind of thing that you're also not gonna have a problem typically having learners be involved in. Some sort of didactic instruction, I think is also can be a valuable part of this. And then one of the other things I think people should know about, our learners should know about, is like the very basic history of how informatics came about, and some of the fundamental principles that underlie informatics. Like there's these classic papers that people have written that I think there's actually some value in having learners read about those and having discussion about that. And then finally, some kind of if it's offered by the electronic health record vendor, some kind of certification typically related to skill sets that learners are being taught. can also be the valuable part of that, honestly, is that there's typically some sort of if it's project based, there's some sort of tasks that learners have to complete, and there's accountability built into the training course for completing those things, which kind of takes a little bit of load off of people's shoulders. So.
While Nick is getting set up, we're going to show you 2 example curricula, and then we're going to try to leave some time so that we can kind of use one of your guys' shops, particularly the residents, as a case study and kind of talk through our experiences and how we might approach it at your shop. And everybody here has experienced this in a slightly different environment, so we'll talk through that.
Thanks. Yeah, and Carrie Baker and Ben Slovis deserve a lot of credit for putting this manuscript together, the sample curriculum. Really detailed. It is got, sample slide decks and objectives tied to, milestones and core competencies and so forth. So please check out this reference. I contributed a small amount to the data governance and data analytics section, really emphasizing what Brian was talking about, the self-service query tools and making sure the residents are proficient in just stuff that they're probably already interested in, like patients that they've seen with particular attendings, procedures that they performed, like department throughput kind of stuff, things that, probably they're on their mind already. And that, should be something that they should be able to do with a little bit of guidance and tutelage. There's a lot of tip sheets and guidance about that. Maybe that'll sort of excite their interest in informatics, and you can mentor them through that, and then you can really start to talk about things like Epic certification if you're on Epic, or like the Smart User certification has a lot of modules. I think it's about 8 hours altogether. So something that even in a 2-week elective, something that you could do, and that is something then that the resident could put on their CV and maybe potentially marketable after graduation. These certifications do seem to carry weight. I'll give a lot of credit to Carrie for, when they first pitched this idea to me, it was before I had like a leadership position in education. And I was really thinking like, oh yeah, this is great. The residents will be able to help with processing help desk tickets. And we'll just, put them right in the thick of it, and they'll roll up their sleeves and we can show them how we do it. And the truth is though, Carrie emphasized a lot of leadership training. And here's where obvious, I think, collaboration comes about. Maybe your program already has like a fellowship in operations or healthcare leadership or research. There is a lot of overlap. And so there should be resources and people that you can turn to help mentor and train the informatics fellows or the informatics residents on this rotation. But check out this great reference online, and let's keep moving.
All right. And so I'm going to just be briefly talking about our experience at the University of Michigan. And the point of this is that every site is different. Every shop is different. The restrictions and capabilities are different. U of M relied very heavily on their tracks. It's a 4-year program, and you used your elective time to generate a buy down that you could then use over 3 years to develop a skill set. And there were things like administrative, ultrasound, a couple of others. But there was not informatics. And so one of my mentors realized that this is where my career was going before I did, and said, hey, I see that you're really into this, and let's make this a thing. And so this paper, again, knowing that we want to save some time for your guys' discussion questions and things like that, is a resource for you if you think that your program might be compatible with it, just to show a different kind of structure. And Brian and Moira have done shorter term sort of blocked style electives, and they have some insights into that as well. And really what this provides is some examples of the kinds of projects that our residents got into, and the curricular framework that you could use to develop such a thing, right? I suspect a lot of you are like, yeah, I'm interested in this. I don't know where to start. Our hope here is just to give you some tools and a place where you could show up to your PD and say, hey, I want to do this. Here's the framework. Here are the possibilities. Now let's work together. And I think you'll get more traction that way rather than just kind of showing up being like, well, I want to do this, but I don't really know how. I think it'll empower you to drive your leadership and manage up and move that forward. So I want to save as much time for questions as possible. So just know that that's there if you need it. And again, all of us will serve as resources. The last thing I'll throw out there is the ACGME has a formal set of milestones that we use for our fellowships. And that can be another great way to look at how we sort of fit the square peg of informatics training into the round hole of medical education. while sort of thinking through those frameworks in a way that your PDs will be familiar with. And so we will leave as much time for questions as I think we have. Are we done now, or do we have a few more minutes in the room?
We can take like one question or maybe do
Cool.
an example case study. I think. Yeah.
All right. Anybody want to kind of run their shop as an example? Any interested residents or students?
I'm Will. I'm a second year transitioning to third year resident at Washington in St. Louis. We have our Department of Informatics, which is housed in the pediatrics department, and we have an ED informaticist. And I kind of more recently been thinking about informatics as a career, but don't have kind of technical training. They recently have started to incorporate some longitudinal tracks into our residency kind of curriculum, but those are just starting now, and so I won't benefit as much from that. Currently, at my elective time, it's kind of like block sort of things, and I was curious with a lot of times that we also have to take sick call during that, and I would be curious what you guys would kind of advise someone if I have 2 and probably 4-week blocks mostly, like what kind of things would be feasible, especially if you maybe involved in initiative, that sort of.
Some ideas to start, and then we'll kind of pass it around and see what other thoughts. You guys are 4.
Yeah, we're 4.
So I mean, this is the seed you could plant for the future without, basically throwing it on the table like, hey, I think this may be a thing. For your current situation where you have to patch something together, these projects are longitudinal, almost inherently. So if you're stuck with blocks and you're able to distribute it as 2-week blocks rather than 4-week blocks, you'll have more opportunities throughout the year to sort of touch in on your project. I think that would give you the best approximation of some of the other ideas that we've had and give you some extra time for skill development while respecting the reality of what your program is going through. And the beauty of this stuff, you need to set the expectations according to what your program's needs are. So in terms of the sick call, right, the idea then shouldn't be to have you on mission critical calls where you're leading something and set your projects up accordingly. And maybe do more of an asynchronous learning approach where you then come together with a mentor or a group of other learners where you can review the content so that if one of you gets called in, it doesn't move the whole thing forward.
Yeah, and this has been our experience in the longitudinal elective is that we try to meet in person. We run the elective many times a year, but we have people who have signed up for the June elective. If they're free, if they have a Monday off, an afternoon off, we try to have future students and past students rotating together, sharing them. So many times the residents and even our informatics fellows are saying we're looking for mentorship opportunities, we're looking to partner and meet with someone. And then, that's how the residents get excited about projects. They see a peer of theirs or someone who's a few years ahead of them, working on something, and they can, start to collaborate, even if they end up getting called in to call one of these things.
Yeah, I would reiterate what everybody else has said. There are oftentimes, if you do have an informaticist, meetings that you can join that, your presence is not critical. So if you get called in, it's not a big deal. But over time, you kind of get more of a flavor of what your informatician is doing. Reading the papers, there's a lot of asynchronous things that you can do and sort of build into your elective. Do you have Epic at where you are? So the smart user certification that you can, build that around your availability. And that's a nice thing to have as, a takeaway on your CV, and you get a lot of really good, useful tools. So I'd highly recommend that. And, if you sign up for a class, get called in, you can always reschedule the class for the certification. So
Thank you guys.
absolutely.
Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm a second year Utah resident. I've been interested in informatics from when we started. We don't have a formal track or anything, but I've been able to get involved. But I've had a little you have 2 informaticists and they are very, very strapped for time. So it's been very hard to get, like, I think they've been able to be involved, but now I'm just kind of doing this like self-guided, longitudinal thing, but I think I've like presented them like with those exact two papers because I only have like, very helpful. But I was wondering if you had any advice for like recruiting other residents and junior residents to like actually formalize a track. I think that would bring a little bit more fruition to actually building a collective.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and especially like you want to gain that momentum. I know we sort of need to vacate the room. One thing I would say is, you know, finding a small change that you want to make that improves your actual ED workflow. That really, like at our institution, has gotten a lot of residents engaged when they're like, I run into this problem on every shift, and then they are able to say like, informatics is the way that we can actually make this improvement. Um, I just want to extend an invitation to you all. We have an informatics, data science, and AI interest group, and we actually have a happy hour from 5:30 to 7:30 this evening at City Winery that most of us, I think maybe all of us will be there, and would be happy to, sit down with you all and discuss this a little bit more. And if you're available tomorrow morning, 10 to 10:50, our interest group actually has their meeting, and we'd love to see all of you there.
And you can join that community. You're already on the SAEM numbers by being here. You just go onto my communities page and look it up and hop on there. We have monthly meetings, it's a great community. And then Mara has to run to a meeting, but Nick, Brian, and I think can spend a couple minutes outside just so the next team can get ready, and we can chat with you guys a little bit more one-on-one. So thanks for coming.